Hello and welcome to Exchange, WSBI-ESBG's podcast. I'm James Pieper, Senior Advisor of Communications at WSBI-ESBG. This week, from Studio 1A in Brussels, we will take a closer look at what's happening at the two associations, who help savings and retail banks thrive. This week's stories focus on innovation, a strategic topic for WSBI in some 80 countries around the world. Joining me will be Natalie Staniewicz, who is our Innovation Manager. She will tell us more about the innovation program here at WSBI-ESBG. Following Natalie will be Senior Advisor Diederik Bruggink, who will share with us a bit on PSD2 and GDPR. And to close things out, we welcome Sabasaba Moshingi, who heads up TPB Bank in Tanzania, which is a WSBI member bank. Okay, joining us now is Natalie Staniewicz. She manages our innovation program here at WSBI-ESBG. So, Natalie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, James.
I got a bunch of questions, so I hope you're ready. I wanted to really touch base first on the innovation program at WSBI-ESBG. Why are we getting involved with this? Why innovation?
Right. Well, financial technology, what we call fintech, digitalization, innovation are big buzzwords, but they're a bit more than buzzwords. They're very important to our banks, savings and retail banks in Europe, but also globally. Mm-hmm. And they have a big need to exchange and share experiences and what is happening on their business side. So what are the strategies? How do you transform your bank? But then also to see what is happening regulation-wise. What are European institutions pushing out in terms of fintech regulation? How is this affecting their business? So we do have a lot of projects to help them steer the way and sail the waves. Okay, well, so it's two prongs then. It's a two-prong approach. There's a policy aspect of digitization and innovation and fintech. So from what I understand, a level playing field between all players in this market is important for us. Correct.
And then apart from the policy side, you have, of course, the business end, how to make your business faster and really embrace the digital wave that is sweeping over banking and not just banking, but other sectors.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that's good points. And how are we doing this? How are we helping banks do this? What are some of the program or projects or activities or partnerships we're doing here at WSBI?
So we have various standing platforms. So we have networks where we gather technology managers, where we gather the board members responsible for retail innovation, where we gather the brand and marketing strategists, and then we also have ad hoc workshops. For instance, we had two recently in Brussels, and we also had recently one in Hong Kong, where we gather our members, but then also external innovation experts to talk about these trends. And then we have regulatory committees, where the regulatory experts discuss all the nitty-gritty of digital and policy aspects.
All right, so that's the policy side. Okay, give us a little sense of maybe the last workshop we had. Just give us a sense of who was involved and maybe a topic that we talked about that you talked about at the workshop that you thought was interesting.
Right. Well, in 2018, we had a lot of talk about the business disruption trends, mm-hmm. and not only now, but what is happening in the next 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. And then also collaboration is a big topic currently. Mm-hmm. So what kind of collaboration is out there? Banks with startups, banks with other banks, banks with other industries. Mm-hmm. And the last big topic currently is open banking, PSD2, APIs.
And we're going to talk about that hopefully later with one of our other colleagues. So GDPR, PSD2, these are two big European, it's a regulation and a directive. So these are two big pieces of legislation by the European Union that affect consumers and banks alike. Let's talk a little bit about those banks within our membership who have taken the digital leap. We have a whole video series on our YouTube channel that talks about different banks and how they're doing that. But maybe, Natalie, you could shed light on a few and maybe give us kind of a history of innovation within our membership.
Right. Well, I find our members extremely interesting because if you look back, some of them are 200 or over 200 years old. So they've been in the market for a very long time. They have had a lot of financial innovations. When you look at the ATM, when you even look at the idea of savings and the savings banks pushing them out. And a lot of our members are now on top of their innovation strategies because they're trying to change to bring back customer experience and to look at how they can tie in digital and physical. So to just give you some examples, Swedbank in Sweden is extremely open recently to innovation also from outside. So they have started an open banking sandbox to try and bring in fintech newcomers and develop new services for their customers. So that's in Sweden, for instance. And then you have CaixaBank in Spain that have actually launched their own digital bank, Imagine Bank, to target young customers and give them exactly the offers that they want. And this is only Europe, but you have innovation in Asia and Africa and Latin America, globally.
So tell me more about partnerships. So I know there was one that was announced this month. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, so we always preach to our members that partnerships are important with a lot of different industry stakeholders. So we can't only preach, we also have to do it ourselves. So we have recently started a partnership with Beehive, and there are a collaboration network and fintech hub here in Belgium that includes banks, insurers, and fintech startups. They have a lot of collaborative projects, and they have events, and they also have good connections to other European fintech hubs. And we've started a partnership with them, and we will see how we can create synergies. So we are looking into common events and also in the background knowledge exchange areas to see how we can bring our two networks together, because we have a global network, savings and retail banks, and they have a Belgian plus also now other fintech hub network. So those two visions can be brought together to see how we can create synergies.
Wow, that's a promising partnership. So finally, want to talk about the efforts coming up. What's ahead for WSBI when it comes to innovation? Do you have some workshops set? What about the World Congress? Are you going to be involved with the World Congress? Just tell us a little bit more about where you see things in the next 6 months.
Right. Well, I would watch the space, because I can't yet tell you about all the activities we're planning, because we're still in the process. But we do have a lot of our internal platforms, such as our brand and marketing strategists, are coming together in June to discuss latest trends in branding, communication, how is the brand identity changing for savings and retail banks, how are fintech influencing this. And then we also have actually our high-level group, which is an executive committee meeting in Berlin. And for the autumn, we are looking into various study visits and also the World Congress, which is happening this year in India. And we will touch upon different topics there. And one of the topic is innovation, digitalization, what it means to savings and retail banks.
You've spent a lot of time with member banks and even non-member banks and other players. I was just curious about, has the tide turns where banks are back on the front foot and maybe back when it comes to digital, or is it the fintechs that are running roughshod over the banking system?
Definitely we see a change, because back in the days it was all about this huge banking disruption wave rolling over the financial institutions, and there was a lot of talk of unbundling of banking. And in the 1990s, you even had Bill Gates saying, we don't need banks, we only need banking. And this is now shifting. So there is a lot of talk about banks taking back the ownership and rebundling. So not unbundling, but rebundling, building on their strengths, such as trust of the customer and also their available resources to bring back a good customer experience, and to tie in technology to help them with this customer experience. And even a few years ago, there was a lot of talk of competition, banks versus fintech startups. And now it's a lot more about collaboration. So how can banks and startups, banks and other industries use their complementarities and their strengths to build something good with the customer in their mind? And also GDPR and PSD2 or open banking are not as frightening as they were potentially at the beginning, because banks are realizing that they are trust hubs, or that they are responsible for their customers' data and their trustees. So they want to use GDPR and also PSD2 to be this important hub for the customer that is trusted, and that of course offers then interesting solutions in partnerships, for instance, with other stakeholders. So open banking is seen as an opportunity to build out your capabilities.
And just for the listeners, open banking, what does that mean exactly?
Yes, so it is, well, the notion started in the UK and in Europe, here in the EU, with PSD2 and the Open Banking Initiative, where banks have to use nowadays what they call APIs to open a certain set of data to third parties. And I'm sure our colleague Diederik Bruggink, our payments expert, will maybe explain it in more detail. But it offers the possibility to become more flexible, because you have a way with APIs to go to other ecosystems and bring in new services for your clients. So you can enhance the offer. And you can also strengthen your own capabilities by using the APIs for your back office and your front office. So there's a lot of thought being put in currently by banks on how they can use the opportunities that are being set out. And open banking, even though it's a big regulatory issue here in Europe and also in the UK, it's actually a global phenomenon, because a lot of other banks, also in Asia and in other regions, are having open APIs to connect to other ecosystems or to other stakeholders, even though they're not being driven by regulation.
What's another ecosystem? What would that be? Could you give me an example of one?
Yes, for instance, banks and other payment initiators. Or you could also look at bank and other industries such as travel. So when you have your mobile app, for instance, of your bank, you could have offers of other providers integrated in your app. So you don't have to go out of your bank anymore from your app, but you can actually use other services that are in your trusted hub, which is the bank app. So that's the thinking behind.
Really fascinating stuff. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to what you're doing with the program, or you want to tell listeners what to look out for or where to go to get more information?
Well, we do have a very active website and also Twitter. So basically you have the Innovation Hub, which has a lot of stories from our members and also our policy messages and news stories on our events. And you can also follow us on at WSBI Innovation on Twitter to get info on our membership, but also on what we at WSBI-ESBG here in Brussels are doing.
Innovation is on the front page of the WSBI-ESBG website, so you can't miss it. So thanks again, Natalie, for joining us, and I hope to have you on soon.
Thank you, James.
Bye-bye. All right, now we have in our studio Diederik Bruggink, and we're here today to talk about EU legislation and how it affects technology, innovation, and banks, and maybe more specifically, those who use banks, their customers. So to kick things off, I wanted to just state that, the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, came into force 25th of May this week, and it covers a lot of different things. So it covers any organization collecting or processing data, including our association and other associations and organizations around Brussels and beyond. Any information, any organization collecting or processing data on individuals living in the European Union. And these rules overhaul data protection laws in the EU and aim to give consumers in Europe and beyond more control over how their data is used. So this is a big deal in policy circles, in banking circles, and beyond. And Diederik, I wanted to talk about, there's a tension here between this GDPR, which we're hearing about, we're getting emails about, asking about GDPR and our own personal data. But beyond that, there's a tension between GDPR and PSD2. And from what we hear from like news organizations, for example, banks could be put in an awkward position if they're faced to open up their data to third parties, such as fintech firms, like Natalie Staniewicz mentioned, and without knowing if they'll comply with GDPR at times or at all times. So give us a little bit of an insight into that, because I know there are some practical issues involved here for banks.
Yes, that's right. And my colleague Natalie Staniewicz explained the concept of open banking, basically requiring banks to give out information to consumers via third parties. And on the one hand, we have in the PSD2 new concepts such as account information service providers, AISPs, and payment initiation service providers, PRSPs. Both services can be delivered by third-party providers, or TPPs, as we call it in the jargon. And basically, PSD2 mandates that these TPPs, once they got a license from the European Commission or the national competent authorities to do so, should have access to the bank infrastructure upon customer demand. However, on the other hand, as mentioned before, we have this GDPR that's pretty strict on data protection and what data is to be shared with third parties. So from the onset of it, it seems that both of these regulations or legislative pieces, in fact, the GDPR is a regulation and the PSD2 is a directive, which is a little bit, there's a little bit different between them. But these seems to contradict. On the one hand, PSD2 requires to open up the infrastructure and give out the data, whilst the GDPR requires banks to be vigilant about the customer data. So it's in fact a balancing act for banks, which made life pretty complicated.
I got you. So let me get something straight. So what are are there any inconsistencies that you see between the two legislations?
Well, on the one hand, of course, the fact on the one hand data sharing and on the other hand data protecting is a bit difficult. On the hand, there's a lot of discussion going on what's actually meant with terms such as explicit consent, which is used in both pieces of legislation in a different way. So therefore there's a lot of tension, and what you have to keep in mind as well, that in fact before the PSD2 entered into force, a lot of TPPs were already active in the field of the account information services or the payment initiation services, and basically they were possibly accessing whatever data they could get hold of by means of screen scraping. Basically, the customer handed out the customer credentials to access the bank account. The TPPs would access the bank account or the internet banking service on behalf of customers, and basically try to get hold of any data they could get hold of, or any customer could hold of.
Do you have some examples? Do you have some examples of TPPs? Are there any ones in Belgium or in Europe that I would know of, or maybe around the world that folks who are listening might know of?
The large TPP, for example, in the terms of account information services, is Banking in France. That's an account information service providers. On the payment initiation services part, you have, for example, companies like Trustly and so forth.
I see. So there are many in the market.
There are many in the market who are already established players. And again, these players were used to do certain things before PSD2 came into force. And now that PSD2 is there, means that these parties are being regulated. And some TPPs, in fact, believe that being regulated means that their current practice or business practice is being rubber-stamped. But that's, in fact, not the case at all. They now start to find out that, in fact, PSD2, combined with GDPR, brings out also certain limitations to what they're doing. For example, to name a few, PSD2 limits only access to payments accounts and not to other accounts. AIS services can only access an account of a customer 4 times a day and not whenever they want, as it's the current case. And the case of payment initiation for service providers, they don't necessarily get a real confirmation that the funds are on its way. So that's a different ball game for them, and not all of these TPPs seem to be aware of that at the moment.
This is really interesting stuff. Is there anything else you wanted to add that we haven't already talked about? Because I know there's a lot of detail in all of this.
Again, the banks are willing to open up their infrastructure, and indeed they're developing dedicated interfaces or APIs.
It's being done in-house or in collaboration with others?
Most of the banks are, there are a couple of API initiatives, as it's being called, being delivered at the moment. For example, the Bruggink Group is a big one, but also STED in France on behalf of the French banks. And what we have to keep in mind that one of the arguments of the TPPs against banks developing APIs was their concern that every bank would develop its own dedicated proprietary API, which means that if a TPP wants to deliver services across multiple banks or multiple countries, they have to deliver or maintain or build one API per bank. Of course, it's not the case, because most of the banks are doing joint efforts in some of the initiatives I mentioned before. I don't believe that there will be one API at the end of the day for the whole of Europe, but there will be a limited set of APIs that more or less share the same principles of data sharing. So banks are really busy with that. Of course, key at the moment is PSD2 compliance. So whatever APIs are being developed, it's there to comply with PSD2 requirements. And of course, we're also listening to what the TPPs are demanding. If they want access to other accounts or other services, or want to know balance before or after a payment has been initiated, banks are in principle happy to deliver those services. But that's beyond the scope of PSD2, which means it's a value-added services, and the TPP then has to enter into a contract with the bank to agree on those value-added services, and also who is going to pay for using those value-added services.
This is a very complicated area, and I'm glad you're here with us to help make sense of it all. Thanks for coming into Studio 1A, and we hope to have you back soon.
Thank you very much.
With me now is Sabasaba Moshingi. He's the CEO, I guess you'd say? Yep. CEO of TPB, so that's Tanzania Postal Bank, but I think their real name is TPB Bank.
PLC.
That's how people know it. PLC, yes. Sure. That's how they know it in Tanzania.
Sure.
So you're here in Brussels today because we had a meeting of postal financial services and the role and the future of postal banks in Africa and around the world. And you lead a postal bank in Tanzania, in East Africa. And we wanted just to talk a little bit about your bank and how the push for digital has changed the way your bank operates. And maybe not just on the innovation front, but what things have you done at your bank to make change so that maybe the digital future is possible?
I was greatly honored to be invited by WSBI to be one of the speakers in this roundtable discussion, where we were looking at how postal financial institutions could be transformed so that they could actually act as catalysts towards addressing financial inclusion. And looking at what is happening globally, we have some serious challenges in Africa as far as financial exclusion is concerned. And also one clear challenge that we are also having is the fact that most postal financial institutions in Africa are not strong enough, really, at least to meet their ratios as far as capital requirement is concerned, and also able to run their operations efficiently. And therefore, if there are still weak financial institutions that are mandated to provide financial inclusion, then obviously something needs to be done. And therefore, sharing some of the best practices from institutions that have done well, like TPB Bank and Al Barid Bank, was really necessary to meet together and look at how best can these other financial institutions that are still struggling could be supported to become really meaningful players as far as financial inclusion is concerned. Now, to answer your specific question about what is happening in TPB Bank PLC, yes, we were previously, for the last 25 years, known as Tanzania Postal Bank, and we became independent in 1993.
So independent from the government?
From the post and the telecommunications, because previously we were a bank which was a savings bank unit within post and the telecommunication company in Tanzania.
I see.
And in 1993 we became an independent bank, and we adopted the name Tanzania Postal Bank, and we have operated like that until March 2017, when we changed our name from Tanzania Postal Bank to TPB Bank PLC.
And your shareholder is the
still
government?
the same. The government is the major shareholder, owning 87%.
Is it under the Ministry of Finance?
Yes,
okay.
We are under the Ministry of Finance, and our mandate is actually to address financial inclusion. And basically, the expectation from the regulator as well as the parent ministry is our bank to be on the forefront of financial inclusion in terms of providing affordable and convenient financial services, which is predominantly savings as well as credit, because those are actually the major attributes that really helps to propel the growth of the economies, especially when you are looking at what can be done to the poor people. So as an institution, we have done a lot in terms of coming up with new products which targets for poor. But as you correctly put it, really the driving force towards our access is use of technology, because today, if you are not digitally well connected, you will lose out. And I think this is one of the challenges that most post organizations are having. And we are doing our best. There is still a lot to be learned, but so far so good.
You mentioned today some of the big questions that top managers within these banks have to ask, and one was, are postal banks good in product innovation? And tell me maybe a little bit about product innovation, maybe at your bank or what's taking place in Africa.
Yeah, it's true. That is a very, very important question that everybody should ask himself. If you want to survive, you must be innovative. Otherwise, others will innovate, and before you know it, you are likely to be thrown out. And we had cases where some banks have actually collapsed because, they were rigid. They couldn't really look at the opportunities that the markets are presenting. So, yes, is an important aspect. What are we doing in TPB? We have a product development team, which is a team of young people predominantly, with some also senior people. They're about 5 to 7 people. Mm-hmm. They meet once in a month to brainstorm what are the opportunities that are available and what kind of challenges that the market out there is facing, where if we are able to come up with a product, it could actually address the problem that the market is facing, but at the same time make us a leader. And for the last 5-6 years of our transformation, we have actually played a significant role in coming up with new products. I may share with you some of these new products.
Please.
Number one, we are the first bank in Tanzania to introduce mobile banking.
The first mobile bank?
The first bank in Tanzania.
Oh,
I'm telling
you.
We are the first mobile bank in Tanzania to introduce mobile banking. Obviously, it was because of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation support through WSBI, so we were able to do that. We are also the first bank in Tanzania to start using agency banking in Tanzania.
And that's
and
very,
actually,
very
we
important.
Started before even the regulations were put out by central bank, which regulates how agency banking is to be managed in Tanzania. We're also the first bank in Tanzania to introduce lending to pensioners. Nobody has ever thought pensioners could be, a good market segment that could receive some lines of credit and be able to service those facilities using their pensions. So we are the first bank to do that, and actually now there are so many banks in the market which are really driving that product as well, and many other. Currently we have received some funds from MasterCard Foundation through SATF, not through WSBI, although WSBI were actually the consulting
helps.
unit.
Every little helps. Okay.
Where we are focusing on is actually to bring into formal financial system the groups which were either previously established by NGOs, but we are also taking a leading role in forming our own groups. I'm passionate about it, and we are doing our best to be as innovative as we can. And I think if we want to survive, definitely we must be able to look at the possibilities of being innovators and not to be laggards and followers all along.
To get there, how important is it to have the support of the government? The willingness by them to provide, I don't know, maybe moral support, financial support, regulatory support. How important is it for them to back what you're doing?
It is actually very, very necessary to have the support of the government. Remember, most of these institutions are actually owned by the government, and therefore for them to be able really to have some meaningful successes, then the parent ministry and the government needs to support them. But I think also what is necessary is the leadership itself. Who runs these institutions as far as the CEOs and the senior managers is concerned. So if you have the right management, they are able really to build a case that the government will be able to listen and support you. And where you cannot be funded probably by the government, you should be able to run your institution as efficiently as possible so that you are able to fund your initiatives and your ideas. And in our case, we have actually been able to drive the changes on our own. But the good news is the government has really been a very good supporter, not in terms of giving us money, but really allowing us to bring the changes as and when we wish. And we have been so successful on that, and I'm very happy that we have not really had a lot of interferences from the government, because that could also be one of the challenges that these institutions could face.
So to transform a postal bank, at least in the case of TPB Bank, you put in performance management.
Yep.
So that means a different way of rewarding staff for performance.
Yes.
So that's a big culture shift within your organization.
A very big cultural shift. And actually, if there is something that I could think of to be one of the key ingredients of our success, was that. You couldn't, for public institutions, and especially in Africa, you really needed a way to get people to do the right things. And for us, and if anybody wants to learn from our experience, yes, performance management is one of the key ingredients that you need to bring on board. But I think also what is necessary is the senior management. You need really to get the right people that can help the CEO and the board to drive the right behavior. And for us, we are happy that we're able to build in those two ingredients pretty well. And so the success that we are having could be attributed out of those two ingredients.
And management, in this case, you were signed on to run the bank, and you were an outsider. I don't know how much experience you had at TPB Bank before you became head of it. Had you worked there before?
Not at all, because here I was in a big multinational bank. My pay was quite okay. Yeah. My children going to the best school paid for by my employer.
So you were a banker in Canary Wharf or in New York or something? And
I was in the Middle East, actually.
Oh, in the Middle East.
The Canary Wharf, I had gone there for an attachment with our head office in London.
I
see. I spent some time there. So, I was happy with what I was doing. And so I had very little information. But then after I went back to Tanzania, then I realized this is not an easy job, but this job has to be done by somebody.
Yeah, and that's important. Lori Dufay, who works here at WSBI, spoke at the postal banking event today, and she said, one thing she's observed is not only that you have someone like you who's an outsider, I guess you would say, who becomes an insider, you come with the right skills. So not only have you, come from other distant lands to come back home to Tanzania, but you're also trained. So you've spent some time, I think, at Georgetown. You've spent some time in other parts of the world where you've gotten your education, both back in Tanzania, where you call home, and overseas. And then finally, you have the will. And that was another reoccurring theme, regardless of the digital transformation or the transformation of postal banks, there's a willingness to change, and you have that will, and we see it in the work that you do. So finally, I just wanted to ask, what other things do you see the future of banking looking like in terms of innovation? We already see you're the first mobile bank in Tanzania. Where do you see the future of banking? Its relationship from digital to the traditional bank branch, or is there something we're missing?
No, it's true. Banking will continue to be there. And that process of intermediation, collecting deposits, pulling the resources together, and looking for the interested parties that require these funds for other purposes like lending and supporting their businesses will continue to be there. But what is going to change is these services can be provided by somebody else. If traditional banks will not be able to be as innovative as the market demands, then we may really see some significant changes in terms of who does this. And if history is something to go by, if you look at the millennials today, they really don't want to go and queue in a bank branch to be served. They don't even want to go and open an account. And if they can be served by somebody else, why not? And looking at the millennials today, the story of we have been there for 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, actually for them is a negative thing. They don't care. They care about, can you meet my needs today? So I think we'll continue to have institutions that are providing banking services, but in a traditional way that we have been used to see, I think that may not be the case. So the challenge for us, current traditional banks, is how can we integrate the old model vis-a-vis what is currently happening in the market, especially the digital space, to be able to meet the demands and needs of what the market requires. And whoever will fail to integrate the two will find himself in serious trouble. And we will do our best.
It's a growing population in Tanzania. It's a young population.
Correct.
So the future is bright.
Yes, it's a young population, and also there is a fairly growth of middle income group of people with capable disposable income to spend. And therefore, if you are able to come up with a product that really makes them feel like you are there for them, you have opportunity to grow. But if you don't do the right things, others will take them on board, and before you know it, you may collapse. And we are really looking forward, continuing to change as the market environment changes, so that we are able to retain the market base that we have and continue to bring on board a new market segment that we had previously not been having them on board.
We are confident that will happen.
Thank you.
Sabasaba, thank you for being on our program.
Yes.
And we look forward to your next visit to Brussels.
Thank you very much. It was nice having you, and looking forward to meet you again. And I enjoyed the clip on innovation that we
That's
did
right.
in Barcelona.
Oh, we got to tell the listeners, we do have a video clip of Mr. Sabasaba on the WSBI-ESBG YouTube channel. So click on the innovation playlist and look for Mr. Sabasaba talking about innovation at TPB Bank.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to Natalie, Diederik, and Sabasaba for sharing their insights on today's podcast. Really, really good stuff. That's all we have for now. I'm James Pieper with our technical brains, Alexander Duchamont, signing off until next time. This podcast is available on SoundCloud. Learn more about WSBI-ESBG on our website, on LinkedIn, or even on Twitter. Thanks for listening.